Hi, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Dog Talk. This is episode 55A.
I'm Cam and this is Julie.
Yes.
This week's Torah portion is a double. We've not had a double this year because of the 13th month that was added to the to the cycle. So this is our first double, and it is Mattot and Massei, which covers numbers 30 to 36. So it's 6 chapters, jam-packed. If you've noticed, we did put last year's Torah portion up for to watch, and so we're not going to touch on those two things. Chapter 30 deals with the vows. We touched on that last year. Chapter 31 deals with the revenge in which is going to happen to the Midianites.
Yes.
Yeah. Got it. Finally. Just took a year. And then we see in chapter 33, it's their travels, everywhere they went. 34 has to do with the borders being established for Israel once they go into the land. 35 is the Levitical cities. We talked about that last year. We won't discuss it this year. And then the 36 is going into more depth about the daughters of Zelophehad. Some of the detail which we really already covered. We might touch on that. We'll see. So let's jump in and look at chapter 32, which I did not just name. And 32 has to do with Reuben and Gad and their request to have the land that's outside of the promised land. The beginning of 32, we see where Gad and Reuben, it says they saw the land and it was good. They wanted to live there. Now remember, in 31, we have the fight or the revenge that the Lord had Israel bring upon the Midianites, and he says this is to exact the Lord's revenge because of what they did at Baal Peor.
So the land that they saw is not the promised land.
It's not the
land outside of the promised land.
Correct. Now, remember, they're having all these wars, as they're getting closer and closer. They fought with the Amorites, and we have Manasseh who fights again with the Amorites in this week's portion. We have where they fought the two giants, right? They fought Zion, and they fought Og. And so all those are they're the idea of rehearsals, okay? Right now, we're not in the land. I mean, we're not in the millennium kingdom or anything, yet we're to rehearse what the Lord asks us to rehearse. In preparation of when we are brought in, we can properly participate.
That's right.
Well, we have them rehearsing the wars, so when they go into the land and it's time for them to fight and take over, right, that they'll be able to do that. They're already prepared. Basically, they're going to go in, and the Lord is going to show them how, who, and when to clear out the people who are not going to be in covenant with the living God.
Right.
In doing that, they're going to be provided for by the Lord. The things that the Canaanites had already created, now the people of God were going to be able to benefit from that. With Reuben and Gad, they go in and they have to rebuild. They have to build their cities. See, they asked Moshe, can we please have the land and not go into Israel?
So they had more work to do.
Yes, but Manasseh, in this discussion of 32, you don't ever see Manasseh requesting to stay there. It's Gad and Reuben who asked to please be able to stay on this side because they have livestock. Well, half their livestock just came from the battle.
Yeah.
It's not like the Lord didn't know that. Think about it. They had a lot of livestock. They got more flocks than livestock, but so did everybody else because they share what they get. The men who go out to battle, which this is interesting, they take 1,000 from each tribe, so there's 12,000 that go to fight. In Revelation, we have 12,000 from each tribe, the 144 that don't fight in a way, but they kind of do. They're protected.
Yeah.
And I really think there's a connection because what we see this week is when they come back from that battle, they didn't lose one person. Well, of the 144,000, there won't be one person either. Right. So I'm not sure exactly how, but I'm telling you, somehow they fit. That 1,000 becoming the 12,000, it's exponential, and I really think it fits because, again, it's preparing to go into the land. It's that last generation that's having to stand for the Lord and allow the Lord, and allow the Lord to fight for them. Right, it's a multiplication idea. So anyway, back to Reuben and Gad. Okay. So they requested, please, could we stay on this side? And at first, Moshe is very upset about this. His anger, displeasure comes because he immediately associates their behavior with what the 12 spies did.
Mm-hmm.
The 12 spies gave an evil report of the land. The fact that they're saying, we don't want to go into the land, we just rather stay here, was giving an evil report to the extent of them saying, we think that right here what the Lord hasn't said we have is better than what he's going to give us. And Moses even says in 32:15, for if you turn away from following him, he shall once again leave them in the wilderness, and you shall be destroyed, you and all the people. Again, we see, look, that's fine. You're going to repeat what the last generation did? Okay, back into the wilderness you go. And ironically, while they are given permission for this land, mm-hmm. they still, in a way, remain in the wilderness because Israel on outside of the land is considered in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And so by them not going in, while the Lord keeps them, he still is allowing them to remain in the wilderness. So we see in First Chronicles that they actually are destroyed early because of where they are, because they don't have the protection of being in the land. They basically, here's the Lord's hand, and they just kind of stayed right out here. Yeah. In 32:39, we see where the sons of Manasseh, actually they go and they fight the Amorites again. Because remember, they're not to take land from the brothers, right? So from Ammon or from Moab. But they go and fight the Amorites. They take over that land, and that's where they live. But here's interesting. They go into where there's already houses. Everything's already set up. So they get the same blessing that's promised to the ones that are going inside. Yes. So the Lord sets up. He says, fine, the land is going to be divided by lots for the 9.5 tribes. So the Lord basically is like, okay, you got yours. So he doesn't, he just doesn't even involve those two again in the discussion of going into land. But the way Moses was upset because he sees it as like the spies. And he tells them, if you promise, if you make the vow that you will go in and fight for your brothers and help them. Because remember, when they're fighting to get this land, when Gad and Reuben got their land, they weren't the only two fighting. Mm-hmm. All the brothers were fighting for that land, all of them. So Moshe's thing is, if you guys will come into the land and fight and clear the land for your brothers to set up and to live safely like you are, then you may return and keep that land. But if not, then your lot will automatically come into land. Rabbi Richmond made a suggestion in link with the Kamash. There's actually 5 issues going on with Reuben and Gad. Okay. The first one is materialism. The idea that only what they see is what they want. And we know this from their own words because they make the comment that it's good for their cattle. Mm-hmm. And they're going to make pens for their cattle, safety for them. And then second, they talk about their kids. Okay, wait a minute. When Moses responds to them, Moses puts it in the proper order. For your kids and your family and then your cattle. Yeah. So he's like, hang on, wrong mindset. The second point is that they're shirking community responsibility. Their idea is like, we got ours, good luck with you guys. Now, it gets turned around, but that's the thought process. Third, fourth, and fifth kind of, to me, go a little bit together. But the third one is that they have a secular or a godless attitude about the land. Mm-hmm. They're not understanding that's the promise. They're thinking, well, this is good enough, this will do. You don't settle. You go all the way for what the Lord's promised. Fourth is they're separating themselves from Israel, and fifth is the contentment for the land. Well, we see that a lot among believers today. Yes. They have a real contentment. They're like, the Palestinians should have that land. And they're not going back to the Word. They're not allowing the Lord to fulfill His promise. They're deciding that it should look another way according to the world.
Even not trusting that the heavenly promises are what is being spoken of. Because when you were talking about the first one, I was thinking of Yeshua saying, I came so they can have life and have it more abundantly.
Yes.
And we see that as, the knowledge of Torah and walking in Torah and what is to come in the next life out of that, where most people see materialism now.
Yes, which would be the idea of Gad and Reuben, the material. What can I get from God? If I live this, then I can have this. He'll always take care of me, blessings.
Yes.
We'll have blessings, but there are rules in which you walk. Gad and Reuben are not choosing to walk in those rules, which means take it all the way to the end. Doesn't Paul talk about all the way to, it's how you end? This is how they end. And look, they stop just short. Now, the Lord still allows them to be a buffer for the rest of Israel, but let me tell you, that was not their plan. I'll be a buffer.
Right.
That was not the plan.
They wanted the easy, they got the harder.
That's absolutely right. How often is that we try to take the easy way out, and it's much worse than had you just gone the proper, stayed on the right road.
That's right.
Julie asked recently, it was a very good point, but wasn't the land just on the east side of the Jordan promised from Genesis 15 to be the land of Israel? Absolutely. But it wasn't time yet. See, when Joshua brought them into the land, it was to be a smaller portion.
Yes.
Because when the King of Kings, when the other Yeshua brings them in, it's going to be as promised to Abraham, which is from the Nile to the Euphrates and the peninsula. It's a large, massive land.
Yes.
Much more than now. Because again, this is to set the patterns. So they were not told to go in there yet. We see in chapter 34 where the perimeters of where they're going was set up. Again, remember, they've got to clear the animals, the people. I mean, there's a lot to be done. The Lord's not going to give them something that's overwhelming. He's giving them a nice, confined area so that they can go in and they can control it and still have elbow room. The Lord also knows that there are some that will not be ejected from the land like they're told. And He clearly tells them this week, those that you do not follow through and eject from the land, they will be a thorn in your side. They will be trouble to you. And to this day, the areas of Israel in which we have trouble is the same areas that we see in Joshua and Judges where they were not kicked out of the land.
Mm-hmm.
They were not. And then we have these issues. The last part I really wanted to talk about, and that has to do with their travels. You may think that's just a list of 42 stops. Oh my goodness gracious. But it's seen as the physical and the spiritual journey that Israel takes. We don't know what happens at half these stops.
Yeah.
To me, the most interesting thing is when you read through, it's the points that are not mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
They don't list where the spies, the golden calf, all these things they don't mention. They do mention leaving Egypt. They mention the Red Sea. They mention the first time the rock is struck.
Uh-huh.
And then you kind of don't hear anything. And then suddenly Aaron dies. Go read in Numbers 20 where Aaron dies. Before that is the event of the rock.
Okay.
So it ties. So we have the first rock. We have the second rock. These are mentioned. These are the points that the Lord's like, pay attention. Mm-hmm. And then after Aaron's death, now the Canaanite king hears that Israel's coming. That's the significant part. Really? Because I don't remember a big significant part there.
Right.
But when you stop and you kind of look at what's the lesson being learned, we see in Egypt where they are trusting, they're watching the Lord acting with against the other gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they see this mighty, powerful God. The first rock striking, if you remember, we talked about, it's where they're kind of like, okay, so we saw you're big and powerful, but do you really care about us?
Right.
Do you care about our personal needs?
Or is this-
Now we have Aaron dying. Well, why did Aaron die? Because they struck the rock instead of speaking to it. And here's what's neat, is when they struck the rock, the Lord said it was to be before their eyes. When Aaron dies, it states that he died before their eyes. Everyone saw it. Rabbi Foreman suggests the reason why it was before all their eyes was to help counter what they did not show. When they were to speak to the rock, it was to allow Israel to see that Moses and Aaron were not the authority, but God controlled it all, and he could simply be spoken to respond, because that's the type of relationship he wanted to have with them.
Mm-hmm.
And by having everyone see that Aaron died, they're now seeing that they aren't demigods. They really do have to go straight to the Lord. And just like we see in chapter 21 of Numbers, where they now go and address the Lord. Hey, God. Now, and then even with the fiery serpents, they say, Moses, we sinned against God. Help us. Intervene for us.
Intervene,
that's
not
what
be
that's what the rock's going to do. The rock is going to intervene. Isn't that what Yeshua's doing? Mm-hmm. He's our middleman. He intervenes for us. So while that example's broken, we get to see how the Lord kind of molds the situation by adding the serpents to be able to say, this is it. You look up, right? You have someone to intercede for you. That's all Moses and Aaron are meant to do, is intercede, and that's what Messiah does. Obviously, that wasn't Rabbi Foreman's thing because he doesn't believe Messiah, but just saying. and the part.
That pattern must happen again, because this week in the New Testament portion, we're talking about Matthew 24 and Luke 13, Luke 21. And Luke 21, he says, when you see these things, look up, because your redemption draws nigh. So this pattern must come around again. And I've already got my wheels turning on what I think that might be. We'll talk later.
Okay. Because those patterns, again, we always say, look for the patterns. Look for them. You know, these patterns, sometimes we suggest and show patterns that weren't even discussed 20 years ago because we didn't see them.
Right.
It's not because we're so, no. It's because the Lord, the same Holy Spirit, is showing us, showing you, showing people all over the world the same things. We're all stepping together as that body's moving together.
Yes.
That's why Reuben and Gad, when they didn't go in, it kind of made the body do this. You know, they've got a foot that's dragging. All right.
You know, and we talk about that too, again, in the New Testament.
We didn't even talk about it.
Yes, because you've got the servant where it says that the servants who are over the house, his people, they're supposed to feed in the season. And so it's not like feed them the same thing all the time. It's feed in your season. Right. You feed in your season. So if you're born in this generation, then you're supposed to have certain food to give to this generation.
Right. So that they'll be strong enough.
But it's the same Holy Spirit all the way through.
Right. Yeah. Neat little tidbits is in 34 where we see the land, the borders. That's basically the borders that are today. Mm-hmm. Which again, I think is interesting because when Joshua brings them in, okay, they're in the limited borders. But when David comes in, he expands them. Well, just like when Yeshua, who's coming in as the son of David, he's going to expand those borders.
Hey, and you know, with Solomon, he almost got it to the promise. And then what happened after that? They split.
Right.
And still have not been brought back together yet.
That's right.
I love that.
Me too.
I love it.
Well, that's it for today. While we could seriously sit here and talk for another hour, and we probably will when we turn this camera off, we read this stuff and constantly are being shown more and more, even when we talk. Half the times I say stuff, I'm like, oh, yeah. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, that makes great sense. We hope that you guys are having that epiphany as you're reading it and able to really see how the Holy Spirit weaves the whole story together so we can see Yeshua, our Messiah, who will be returning from the very beginning to the very end. Yes, it is soon. Every day is sooner.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, what that means, we don't know. But be faithful in your walk today so that tomorrow you're ready if he calls at any time. We will see you on the flip side with Britt Hadashah and Julie. You have a marvelous day.
Shalom.